If you're no stranger to the channel or my videos, you probably remember a video that I put out where I gave a ton of these away, like 400 of them, these YouTube certified welder stickers. And I did that kind of to help motivate you guys and so that we can all have a laugh, because a lot of us will never be certified welders, nor do we really need to be. And that sticker was kind of a way of saying, hey, I can weld, I enjoy welding. I'm not certified, but now I sort of am because you watch some YouTube videos. You know, it's kind of funny. You get the point on that. Anyways, a lot of viewers have asked me over the past 6, 7 months, and even before then, like, well, what certifications, if I really want to get certified, not just on YouTube University, what can I get? How do I get them? Should I be getting them? What are the differences? And that's what we're going to be tackling today. And I got to put this out there up front right away. What I'm going to talk about is heavily based in North America, more or less the United States. I will touch a little bit on Canada, but this is not necessarily applicable to everywhere around the globe, because if there's one thing I have found is a lot of countries do things differently, and the requirements to do certain things are a lot higher. Like, I've read about countries where if you want to weld on a frame of a vehicle, you have to have a certification through like the nation or like some national certification, or you're not allowed to do that. Well, here in America, the standards, well, I hate to say it, are a little bit lower when it comes to welding in general. At the low end. At the high end, we're as equal or harder than most other countries, but to the average person, it's a little bit more forgiving. So the first thing we're going to cover is, what is a certified welder? It's a term that's thrown around so much, and it has so much different meaning, and in many cases it can mean absolutely nothing. To call yourself a certified welder means that, in theory, you met a test somewhere, you did a test, and you met the expectations of that test, and therefore you were certified to meet that. The problem is it comes down to, well, what test was it? Who was it for? What standards were you welding to? Were you welding to the American Welding Society? Were you welding to the United Authority Pipe Welding? Were you welding to state structural code? All of that plays a role, and it can be very confusing. So to help understand this, I'm going to go grab the chalkboard, and we're going to talk about the different types of certifications. So here are 4 categories of welding certs, and we're going to go through each one of them so we have a better understanding. Now, there are certifications out there that maybe I'm not aware of, don't understand, that fall outside of these, but you're going to understand the major differences and how valuable some of these are. Now, they're not written in order of importance. I probably should have done that, but for the sake of what we got, this is the 4 categories that we're dealing with. The first one we're going to talk about is state welding certifications. All of the states in the United States, to my knowledge, have laws on the books about stick and wire welding certifications dealing with structural steel. So these are often known as state structural certifications. Great example would be, I am certified in the state of Wisconsin for state structural for stick welding, and that is vertical up and overhead test on somewhere around 3/8 plate with a backing bar done with stick all the way out, both vertical up and overhead. That test allows me to do structural steel welding in the state of Wisconsin. That certification is very similar to other states. However, I am only certified in the state of Wisconsin for structural. Whether or not I would be able to weld structural steel in another state would depend on whether that state has reciprocity with Wisconsin. They may not, and I may have to retest in that state for that certification. The nice thing about this is, technically, one, I'm certified in the entirety of the state of Wisconsin. That is good. And 2, technically, it's between me and the state. There is no employer that possesses this certification on my behalf, and you'll understand that more when we get into some of the other ones. So this is mine, and I can take it from employer to employer. The nice thing about this as well is if you're a self-employed welder and you possess this, it may allow you to get a discount on your insurance. Don't quote me on that, but welding insurance is expensive, and if you can prove you're certified, it could likely reduce the cost of your insurance. Now, here's the problem with this state certification. Getting it, it may not be available in your state to just anyone. Very commonly, people who go through community colleges to learn welding will get a certification for the state structural in their state. That's part of the program, like of an associate's degree. And for the most part, these tests aren't really that hard. They do take skill, but they're not that hard compared to some of the other certifications. Now, to the average person that maybe you're welding in your basement or your garage, how accessible is this? Well, it depends on your state. You may be able to schedule a date at a local community college, go in and test to take this, and if you pass, you would have the state structural certification. That may be possible. The first place to look would be to Google your state's name and then put structural certification for welding, and more than likely your state has some information on how to get it and how to test for it. Now, it goes without saying that if you think that you're a halfway decent welder and that you can just show up and do a simple weld test and pass it, you're probably fooling yourself. You have to do things right, and there are specifications such as how far the beads can sit off of the plate when you're done, and they do typically do a bend test of it, and if you bust the bend test, well, you bust the test. So this isn't as simple as, hey, you can run a couple rods, you're good to go. There is actual testing on what you weld, and you must pass it. Now, on this particular certification, I'm not sure how long it's good for. I'll have to look into that, and then I'll put it up now in the state of Wisconsin. My guess is it's going to be multiple year, and if you have continuity, aka you can prove that you're still welding, you probably don't need to renew it. So that's probably a good thing. So now let's move on to what I call the workplace certifications. This would be you get hired at some company, we'll call it Harry's Welding, and they test you and say, okay, you're good at welding and we certify you for our work. This is borderline useless, and what I mean by that is it's the same as kind of this. Okay, you went on YouTube University, you watched a couple of my videos, now I gave you a sticker, now you're certified, right? A lot of workplace certifications, or what they call certifications, aren't worth the paper they're printed on, even if they did give you a piece of paper. And the reason I say that is that if you leave that place of employment and you go apply somewhere else, they're going to ask you, well, what certifications you have? And you say, well, I got this from my current job. And we're like, well, who's that? And what standards did you meet? What, like, it has no relevance to anything. These are the worst certifications to have because they're meaningless. There's nothing backing them, and they're not accepted basically anywhere, okay? So be very careful of these. You might think you're a certified welder, and the reality is, in the grander picture, the bigger picture, you're not, okay? Now, the third type is kind of a modification of a workplace cert, but it's what I call a bureau cert. And keep in mind, there's a bunch of other bureaus, like the UA is a bureau, and I'll get into that in a minute. But a bureau cert is an employer, say they're doing structural work, okay? They contact American Welding Society, AWS, which is a massive organization here in America, and they contact them and they pay them money to use a procedure that they have written, a procedure that is known to work for the type of work that this employer is doing. And then everyone who works there tests on that particular procedure. So that procedure will tell you things like how thick of metal to use, what process, what the parameters are, what's considered acceptable, what's considered not acceptable. All of those things, it's a welding procedure, and you are certified to that procedure at that employer. So it is a step up from some Tom, Dick, and Harry, workplace certification, but there's some serious downsides to this. The main one being that, okay, you're certified to American Welding Society standards on one of their procedures, but your employer that did that, they more or less own the procedure. They're the one that paid for it, and you certified to that. But when you leave that employer, you have no paperwork that says you're certified on anything. You can only tell a future or new employer that you had been certified, but it's not transferable. That is an absolute huge problem, because more or less when you leave whoever you're working for, it's pointless and useless other than being able to say that you at one time were certified. Now, does that mean that you lost your ability to weld? Absolutely not. Does it mean that you will struggle to meet a different welding test? Absolutely not. But those are not possessed by you as the individual. And you have to be very, very careful about this, because there's a lot of unscrupulous welding schools out there that will tell you that you're certified as part of their program, but you end up more or less getting one of these two and not this, or what we're going to talk about in a little bit, that are transferable, or at least you own, and you can imagine a pickle you can find yourself in. The other thing that's worth noting is, depending on what line of work you're getting into, these may not even allow you, well, this one I know won't, but a certain bureau cert might not even allow you to test in to get on a job site for something. You have to be careful about that, okay? Now, the fourth category is somewhat specific, but you'll understand what I'm talking about. So UA certs, which is what I currently possess, which is known as the United Authority. In a simple form, what the UA is it's a governing body that represents piping trades in North America. And they have standards and policies and procedures. If you take one of their tests, pass, you are certified through the UA, and that certification is yours, and it is good anywhere in North America. So like in my case, I'm certified to weld extra heavy with stick welding, 6010 root and 7018 fill and cap. I can take that and go anywhere in the country, and I'm certified. Now, that is the most powerful certification out of any of these, because it trumps state, it trumps local, it trumps everything else. The downside to this type of certification, and keep in mind the UA represents piping trades, there likely is another bureau type that is nationwide for maybe structural steel or something else. I'm not aware of it, but there could be. But the serious downside to this UA cert is that it's not available to just anyone. And what I mean by that, you understand the state is, well, you might be able to test into it at your local community college. You get the picture on that. Workplace certs, they're basically useless. The bureau certs through like AWS are owned by your employer, and well, how are you going to test into that unless you work at some place? The answer is you're pretty much not. And the UA certs are basically, you have to be a member of the piping trades, aka a pipe fitter, steam fitter, plumber possibly, or that sort of thing, to get these. So they simply are not accessible to an average person. The even greater problem kind of with all of this is that if you want to work on certain jobs, you more or less have to be certified through the UA or some form of structural steel governing body just to get on a job site. And a great example would be, say you want to work in a power plant and you want to weld some pipe, right? Well, guess what? If you're certified under the API standard that is common for petroleum, you may not even be able to weld on site of a power plant, and you may not even be able to test in to even get considered to go to that. So like a gate test without a UA certification. Oftentimes, any kind of piping job under what's called B311 code requires you at the door to even test a gate test to be UA certified. So that means that all of you out there who are not certified that want to make decent money at a big job, odds are you're going to have to get in possession of these certs through a piping union to even attempt to get on a job like that. I mean, there's always ways around things, but this is kind of like the gold standard. It has the highest qualifications to pass those tests. And for a lot of code work, that is the one to have, but unfortunately, it's the least accessible to most of you. So the question of whether or not you need certifications really comes down to the type of work that you plan on doing or how you want to make money welding. Right off the bat, I'm going to tell you that from an insurance perspective, you likely will save money on insurance if you have a state structural certification. Likewise, your insurance company will likely only insure certain things that you might do as a welder. What you have to understand, if your goal is to be self-employed or to make side hustle money legally, meaning you're a licensed insured business, you need to tell your insurance company the type of work you're doing. Pictured here, Bob here, he likes to weld fences and makes lots of money, thus the $100 bill. Welding fences is a pretty low liability type of work, and the insurance rates are probably going to be reasonable. And unfortunately, reasonable could be as much as $500-600 a month or as low as $200 a month, depending on where you live. So welding fences is low liability, pretty easy to get insurance for. If you, or in this case Bob, wanted to go weld structural steel on a bridge, the insurance policy for his company could be $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year or more. Again, it has to do with the type of liability of what they're doing, okay? So I don't know what kind of liability work you're doing, but I do know that if you're not licensed and insured as a business, then you hold all the responsibility, and if someone gets hurt or killed due to your work, you can be brought to court and sued. And that is why this is kind of outside of the scope of this particular video, but you probably should have an LLC and insurance if you plan on doing welding work, simply because they can go after the company and it kind of ends with the company more or less, unless you're severely negligent. And all I mean by that is Bob's fences, if the fence falls over and kills somebody's dog, well, they have to sue Bob's Fences Incorporated because that's who they hired. They didn't technically hire you as an individual, or in this case, Bob. They hired Bob's Fences. So it's a shield of liability for the individual from the business work they do, and it's an amazing power. Anyways, back to what I was saying. If you want to do small repairs like the fences, yard art, lawn furniture, random odd jobs like that, you really don't need to be certified in this country, in America. Should you be? Well, realistically, you should probably, again, going back to the state structural, in your state, you should probably possess some level of certification. Just, well, for one, it's good for advertising. You can tell people, hey, I actually have a certification. And two, it will likely reduce your insurance premiums. And also, if you ever get drugged to court and someone says that you're incompetent, you can go back and say, well, I'm actually a certified welder, and it provides evidence that you're not just some idiot. Okay, so all of those things are good. Now, it becomes kind of a gray area if you want to do work like, say, you want to repair vehicle frames. That your state may have some sort of a certification process for that, or a requirement. Always check with your local laws on that. But in Wisconsin, there really isn't a whole lot regarding the legality of a shop doing repairs like that. Where the problem generally comes in is if you want to get insurance and that's your specialty, is straightening and welding, say, semi-truck frames, your insurance premium is going to be sky high, again, because of the liability. However, that doesn't mean that you as an individual, if you have an LLC, can't do a repair like that. But the important thing is that it is under the scope of your insurance, aka your insurance company has specified on a legal binding document that says you would be covered on that. Otherwise, again, just because you have $300 a month insurance doesn't give you a free-for-all to do any welding you want on anything. I think you get the picture on that. Now the question comes up for you guys that want to run what we'll call a illegitimate business, aka no insurance, fly by night, you know, flux core bandits is what I really call it. If that's what you want to do to make side hustle money, absolutely you can do it in this country, but understand the liability rests on you and you solely. And in the event some of your work fails, you can be dragged into court personally and have a nightmare of a problem to deal with. And a certification might help with that, but at the same time, the shield of liability isn't the certification. It's more or less the fact that you have a business that's a different entity, okay? The certification for most people is really just showing that you're competent. It will help you get jobs in the future, especially if you have like a UA cert or a higher level like a state cert. That will help you get jobs, but it's not going to shield you from liability. Now, I know I breezed through a lot of this pretty quickly, and I probably overlooked some things, and you might be confused about something. And that's the great thing about the comment section is ask questions, I'll answer them. And if enough people have certain questions, I may go back into this and do a part 2 where I cover more about actual specific certifications, what they're useful for. You get the picture on that. Now, as far as you at home, if you're not working for a contractor that requires certifications or has procedures they want to certify you to, if you're not a steam fitter or a pipe fitter, and if you're not doing structural work, do you really need a certification? The answer is not really. If you want to run a little side business or even a full-time job where you wander around your city or community weld repairing stuff, technically, you don't need to be certified. Now, I say technically, because again, let's say you want to do a job where you bid on something the local school system or the local government to you wants some kind of weld repair, like the steps and railings, right? In that bid, like the packet that you can pull up to try and bid on that job to make some money, it might say that you need to have state structural certification. So in that case, if you do not have that certification, you can't even bid on that job. And the problem with that is you're going to be stuck doing jobs that probably don't pay as well. Like a simple railing repair at a school for a local government could put $1,000 in your pocket if you were the lowest bidder or the only bidder, okay? And you could make some decent money. Versus when your neighbor comes over to repair his shovel for $2, you're not making much money. So if you really want to make money, you need to find out, well, for one, what jobs would actually hire someone as an individual, typically contracted work from government, and you need to find out what they require. So look at your local city's page at jobs that are out for procurement, it's called. Investigate that and look at what they require. That will give you a huge insight into what you actually need. But for the sake of running your own little welding repair business, no, you do not need to be certified, and there probably aren't certifications available to you in most cases. Again, consult your local laws regarding that. And like I said earlier, it's in your best interest if you want to actually make money doing side jobs to be an actual LLC. Therefore, you have a shield of liability to protect you. That's worth far more than, say, me running an illegitimate business as a certified welder, which I currently am through the UA. It means nothing. My certifications only will be used in court. I could use them to prove that I'm competent, but I can't use them to shield me from liability. That's the purpose of an LLC or some form of a business. And it's also the purpose of why you pay money for insurance. And when you do illegitimate things, unfortunately, in the court system, you get taken advantage of, is one way to put it. With that said, I will say this. I wish it really was easier for people who want to just be really good welders to be certified in some fashion that they meet a requirement. But the truth is that most certifications that are out there are only good for a short amount of time. So In the case of my UA certs for pipe welding, they're good for 6 months. And if I don't recertify in that time, aka I have to submit proof, signed proof that I've been welding for continuity, if I don't do that, I lose my certifications. That is every 6 months to make sure that I don't just get certified, say in 1990, haven't touched a stinger since, and now I go on some high liability job and claim I know what I'm doing. So most certifications require constant renewal, annual or biannual at a minimum. So it still, as a home gamer per se, would still be somewhat of a hassle because you might have to retest or go to the local community college to prove that you can still weld every 6 months to a year, and that becomes a hassle. So, I wish there was an easier way to do all of this, but the truth is, there really isn't. And certifications are primarily used to get your foot in the door at a higher liability job, and is primarily something that's specified by government agencies and businesses that they want as a minimum requirement, so they know that everyone who comes in the door at least is somewhat competent. But again, as an individual, you're not likely doing stuff for high liability jobs. So again, how much does it matter? Well, really depends, I guess. Now, with all that said, I'm going to leave you with a thought. I don't know what your plans are to do with welding, but if you want to make a living at it, you have to ask yourself, who do you want to work for? And what I mean by that is, do you want to work for homeowners that have $5, $10, $100 jobs that you can barely put food on your plate with? Or do you want to go do work for maybe a government agency or as a contractor for a larger company who will pay enough money to where you can actually own a house and have a decent truck? I think we all know the answer to that. So one of the things you're going to have to make a decision on with your welding is, if you want to make a living at it, you have to pick your clients. And the flux core bandits that are out there that'll weld a trailer for $10, you can't compete with them. You'll go out of business and you'll starve to death if you're competing with those kind of people. You need to work for companies that have decent money and understand the value of your skills in order to make a living welding. There's just no other way around it, and it really goes for anything. So with that said, maybe you should look at getting some certifications through your state if they're available, and then start a legitimate business and start going after real money, because $15 an hour isn't enough to put food on anyone's table. So with that said, hopefully you learned something. If you got any questions, you know where to leave them. Until next time.